I'm Brooke Warner. I'm the publisher of She Writes Press and Spark Press. I'm also a member of the board of the Book Industry Study Group, and I'm finishing my term as a representative of the board, so I've been happy to be part of this group for the past 2 years. I'm here to introduce Brian O'Leary, the moderator of our final panel of the morning. How do we get here? Other markets, other models. And as you all know, Brian is executive director of the Book Industry Study Group. On his watch, BISG has built a vibrant committee structure, significantly expanded its online and in-person programming, and also maintained a solid financial bottom line. Not so easy to do. He's taking a brief break from running this entire meeting to moderate this conversation about what we can learn from other markets and about how to transform the US supply chain communications. Brian also wanted me to remind you that the only thing standing between you and lunch is this panel. So please welcome Brian O'Leary and the panelists. Thank you.
No pressure. So I think the message that you're hearing pretty clearly this morning is that the model that we have in place for the supply chain in the US book business is not fit for purpose. You can say it's broken, you can say that it served a really strong purpose in 1988 and has decayed slowly over time, but I think that we need to rethink that. And I had a chance to write something for PW that appeared in their soapbox a week and a half ago. That the title of it was "It's Time to Fix the Plumbing." We're the plumbers, and our committee work is kind of tackling that. I wanted to kind of do a quick overview. Gary Jones and I wrestled for the privilege of having geeky slides, and Gary won. So
love it.
Onyx is essentially a way to transmit information from one database to another. I mean, it's a complicated message, but it's a way to move data. A publisher can use it to send information to a retailer. A publisher can use it as a standard way to send metadata to a lot of different retailers. A lot of different publishers can send a lot of different metadata to different retailers. But if it's not all the same standard, and in the US market it is not the same standard, there are always variations, then it gets really complicated. Some markets, and you'll hear at least one example, have introduced central agencies or data aggregators. So publishers give the metadata to those aggregators. The aggregators sometimes provide feedback to their publisher clients. That helps them improve the quality of the metadata, and then they provide that in a standard way to their retailing clients. This is the US market. In fact, it's worse than that, because those databases are also all talking to each other. So you start to get this replicating effect. And I believe it was Claire who talked about the 2012 study that I did way back when I had an honest job. And we thought that the metadata market looked kind of like this. So larger publishers going direct to retailers, medium-sized publishers making a choice between going direct and working through intermediaries, and then smaller publishers almost always working with intermediaries. The reality was that when we finished the study, that everybody was changing everybody else's metadata. My favorite statistic coming out of that was 75% of the time, page count metadata is wrong.
Oh my God.
And that's probably still true today. We don't, and that's not because there's a problem with metadata, there's a problem with the definition and the execution. That's a piece of the problem that we have to solve, but it's also not going to be solved simply by trying harder. We've been trying harder now for, in minimal terms, 10 years, but more likely 20. I think we have to change the structure of the system. So we have today, let me just go back on that. We have today, and I'd like to put up Lauren's presentation, two examples, one from Canada and the second from the UK, of changes that have been put in place, or in some cases, just new approaches that have been put in place that have significantly changed those markets' ability to get a good job done. So let's start with you, Lauren. There you go.
Thank you for having me today. I'd like to thank Claire as well, who kind of effectively introduced some of the things I'll be talking about today and saved at least 5 minutes for you guys to go into lunch. Canadians are deeply insecure and we love to be validated by Americans, so this is an absolute thrill to be here with you all today. And thank you very much for having us. Press the big button. Let's see if we can advance. There we go. So I've been in the publishing industry for about 20 years and at BookNet since 2011. I do a lot of projects. I do operations, I do HR and client acquisitions. I do all programming for our educational program, including our conference tech forum. I lead on our equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives, and I also do a lot of special projects around standards. We don't have a lot of time, so I'll go quickly into what BookNet is. We are a nonprofit. That's really important to understand what we do. We were founded about 20 years ago by the industry for the industry. We represent all sorts of participants in the industry, from Canadian-owned and incorporated publishers, as well as multinational publishers with distribution or publishing operations in the country. We work with chain and independent retailers, we work with distributors, wholesalers, public libraries, and all of this is aligned around a Canadian culture mandate. So we were very closely involved with the government when we were first formed, and that involvement does continue to this day. Important to note is that we represent English language Canada. There are 2 markets in Canada, one French language and one English language. We have a sister organization called BTLF that operates in French Canada. We work very closely with them, consider them like a sister. And we even operate some of our software runs some of their websites. Our mission and mandate is all around collaborative improvements to the supply chain. People like these words. There's a lot of nouns there, so I'll leave them there momentarily. But why was BookNet formed? I'd like to say it was a very Canadian solution. Canada is a very, very small market north of a massive market. And we have a very small population across a huge population, and that causes some unique problems. And it was felt at the time that there needed to be a neutral central clearinghouse for information. We call ourselves like a technological Switzerland. We want to make sure that all of the work that we do has the benefit for both big and small players, established and emerging players, both foreign-owned and domestically owned, and if you're operating as a public or a private organization. We work very collaboratively. We are very interested in feedback and engagement from all of these groups from our founding 20 years ago to this day. And neutrality is really important in all of that. It was felt that there needed to be an honest broker, a trusted central body that people could rely on without relying on privately owned products and services. So very Canadian solution. For delivery of our tactics, I don't know why I shouldn't point at that. That's not the remote. I know that. We have kind of 5 key ways that we deliver our services. First is we build software. We are a software developer. We own our own intellectual property. We build it in-house. We have a team of about 5 developers now, about 5 project and product managers, as well as marketing and communications people that build and develop our products. We have a huge education and outreach program where we actively offer professional development as well as post-secondary education for the community. We work very aggressively in the standards realm, both representing Canada internationally and pushing for standards adoption in our community. We have a large research component where we conduct our own research on behalf of the industry to both educate and then inform and have them use the research as well. And a lot of industry coordination. Because we are that central source, people come to us, work with us, sometimes go through us to get their ends met. I am of the age where you have to have a meme in a presentation, and of course, none of this was easy. This one is your fault, Brian. You said you wanted the slide with great graphics, but now it's too long, so I couldn't do the whole thing, but it's there, and I can provide you a link for that if you need that. But as just a really brief history of BookNet, I don't need you to know the details from any of this, that's not important, but what you can see there is a gradual, intentional accumulation of work and product delivery. Over time, year after year after year, just adding more and more and more, while continuing to deliver on the services that we initially launched. And that intentional and incremental design was integrated from the start. From this little brief diagram here, you can see there's kind of like a triangle in the middle, and these three service areas are what we do, is our software, our standards work, and then research and education. And the interlinking there is intentional, because anything we deliver, if we offer a product and service in the software realm, we make sure that it's built on standards, it's built to last, and it's built on that agreed collaboration piece that we push the industry along and ensure that they adopt. And inversely, we use our software services to power things like our research and education mandate. So we produce reports, we do the education piece that I mentioned before, working as a professional development provider and things like that. So all of this is interlinked. The next slide is to just kind of pathway through and kind of give a brief model of how we did it. The first effort that we put in right upon our launch in 2002 was standards. Right away with EDI and working with our partners now that are with MVB, we launched the EDI standard and have maintained that to this day through the PubNet network. We also worked on identifiers, and then a large project working with bibliographic data, particularly ONIX. That project was launched with a certification scheme that was widely adopted. I believe it was even adopted in the US at the time, where we created a medal system that is still haunting us to this day because people really loved the medals. The bronze certification was the minimum expectation of sending data in our marketplace. There was a silver where if you did that and sent it as 2.1, that was a little icing on top. And then gold is if you could provide additional side-loaded marketing information. We still get requests for people to have badges on their websites and things like that. And I love how successful that was. That template was just on Excel. And the main thing to take from this is that because the program was so successful, it became very obvious early on that we needed to be able to store and parse the information that was coming in. The volume of data, the amount of work that needed to be done to analyze it and to house it became too much for our internal systems, and so we launched BiblioShare. BiblioShare is the shared metadata repository that Brian has spoken about, that Claire has spoken about, and others today, that houses ONIX records, images, both covers as well as author, interiors, spines, everything you can think of, position files, supplementary materials like teacher's guides, samples, tables of contents, complete excerpts, whatever you can think of. And it's quality controlled. And what that means is that when data comes in, it does not come out or even enter our database unless it's been validated, both through the schema as well as according to the best practices, hat tip to the North American Best Practices document, and the qualifications that we have specific for our market. So if the bad data comes in, that's fine, mistakes happen. We are also guilty of sometimes fixing it, even though we shouldn't, but it does not go out. It will not go out. And the other key thing is that it's free. As a default, BiblioShare is free to send data to. It's also free to get data from through our API services. We only ever charge if we have to build something custom for someone, which does happen. People have specific requirements, and we've done some of that in the past. We love a good data slide. So here we go. So quite elegant, files come in, they go through a series of checks, and they only go out if they pass the checks. And throughout that, there's a feedback loop where we send emailed reports that go back to the data center to the company that sent the data, where they can see where, to an itemized level, where the data did not pass quality checks. So it's very efficient, elegant. People love the reports. Everyone loves being validated and sending a note to their boss saying they passed the file for the week. So it's been a very successful program. And our web services. So this is all the API stuff, all of the programs that pull data and work from the BiblioShare system. There's no quiz, you don't need to remember any of these, but Brian has asked me to focus on two, and I'm gonna focus on the WordPress plugin that we offered, as well as our Shopify plugin. So the WordPress plugin is quite simple and elegant. If you have a WordPress website, so if you're a blogger, just someone with a website, media, etc. If you put in an ISBN, it will ping our API and it will pull back title, cover, author, price, etc. cover, and it will, as long as you've formatted and set up your site, it will go into the places that you've styled that for. Shopify is another massive success, one that I don't know that we anticipated to the scale that it has been. It was developed for the same intent, just another way to demo how getting the data and having clean data can work for everyone. So what it does, again, pulls from the API using, I don't know if anyone's built a Shopify website, very, very simple. In our system, if you just if you have the plugin, you just pop in the ISBN, and all of the product metadata comes in, everything, the weight, so you can make your shipping calculations, the price, variable price, if everyone sends different price composites, all of those wonderful, delightful pieces of data all come in, and you as the retailer can decide how that is all displayed. It is 100% free. It's only available in the Canadian Shopify store. I'm sorry, we get lots of requests from Americans asking for it, but because BiblioShare data is largely Canadian focused, we haven't been able to support. We now have over 100 stores using this, and this is even publishers that have sent us their data through BiblioShare that are now mounting their own websites on Shopify using the data because they know it's clean and validated through us. And last year, excluding, Noah wanted me to put facts in, excluding any BookNet products that use BiblioShare data, anything like that, 180 million queries went in through BiblioShare's API last year that we served up. And so one of those services that we use is Panelists. This was another massive success and a cyclical success for BiblioShare. It is a digital cataloging solution unique to the Canadian market, affordably priced for the Canadian market, which is quite important for our users. And again, it uses BiblioShare data. And one of the wonderful effects of it is that as Catalyst became more and more popular and adopted by more publishers and retailers, publishers were seeing their data in a visible way that they couldn't have viewed through their publisher management system and their internal Onyx files. Like, they couldn't see it. So then they started seeing it. They started seeing the errors. They started seeing what was missing. And this actually made the data better. People started fixing their data, enriching it, offering more and more and more, because they realized it was actually converting into sales. They could see retail orders mapped to each book, to each catalog, down to that data. We also have data points collected specifically through Catalyst, like representative provided best comps. So if the sales rep doesn't agree with the comp provided by the publisher, which is often, they can provide their own comp through the system, key selling points, all kinds of stuff, which has been a great asset for those publishers who operate in Canada, but might be part of a branch plant and can't access some of their data from coming from the States or elsewhere. I know Brian loves 49th Shelf. It is a program built by another association in Canada. It pulls information from BiblioShare and is all filtered based on the Canadian contributor. So a book can only be on that site if it has a Canadian contributor. And if you couldn't tell that it was Canadian, there's a Canada goose on the right. So that's how you know. If you didn't even have to see the word Canada on the page, but that's how we do it up there. Another data slide, again, love the basic graphics, right? So this is everything about BiblioShare, and as you know, if you know anything about BookNet, we really didn't stop there. The other thing Brian wanted me to talk about was our sales data analysis platform. So this is where we collect data and aggregate it on a weekly basis from retailers across the country. It was launched in 2004, so it has been running for almost 19 years now. We have a national panel of retailers that we think, based on publisher feedback for the trade marketplace, is about 85%, over 2,000 retailer locations, which I know is very small compared to the US. We also get daily data. I know someone was talking about daily data, but we do get dailies from some retailers, so that's important to note. And I think this is fabulous. Obviously, like, to have a nonprofit build an aggregation service like this that is queryable by our users, because there's a whole UI associated with this, I think is really important. I also think it's important because of the trust building that went on to build this. We had to gather a significant group of retailers and publishers together who would all agree to keep the data protected. This was their key. For retailers, this is their most sensitive business information, what they're selling, right? And to get that agreement was really a national project that took a full 2 years from the launch of the organization to get that critical mass of retailers that would not only protect the data, but also anonymize each other, because no one retailer wanted it to be obvious what they were selling in that data set. That was a really small team at the time. I think there was 4 people working for BookNet at that time. So a massive project, and as someone who works on retail recruitment now, I know how hard it is to gain that trust with retailers. So a huge accomplishment there. And then, as we do, we built on it. So we had an amazing, the current sales data is our 3rd build, all done in-house. And we built another layer upon that, which is library data, which is library checkout information from public libraries across the country. We built the spec for it. We worked with all the various ILS providers, library information system providers, to have the data sent to us again on a weekly basis. We aggregate it. We use some of their identifiers to work with it. And right now, since we launched it the month of the pandemic launching, so it was an auspicious time, and we have about 25% of the public library market, including some of the largest public libraries in the country. I'm almost done, I promise. Then the point of all of this is, again, to show how integrated all of this is and how we can use all of this. And I'll make a little joke, and I've cleared this with Dan Lubart from earlier. So cookbooks in Canada, they do sell, I promise, and they don't have to have caribou mentioned. So for example, I now could go into our BiblioShare database, and I know that there's no BISG code, for example, for caribou cookbooks, but I could go and I can search and I can look at all of the keywords or the descriptive text, and I could identify words in our BiblioShare database, anything with caribou. I could pull all of those ISBNs. I could also pull ISBNs that don't have that keyword indicated. I could then query those ISBNs on a granular level in our sales data system, and I could get you a year-by-year trend line to fact check if books need to have caribou mentions or if there's a correlation between caribou mentions and cookbooks. So it's a fabulous system that we've built because we can now use all of this information to drive a whole research and education platform where we are producing market level at the granular ISBN level as well as whole top level market information, trend information, both to our community and people who need to use that information to make decisions, such as our funders at the government level. And to boil it all down, I think there are 5 success factors that have enabled our success within the Canadian marketplace. It has to be noted, and I know very different from here, is sustained government funding. It's incredibly important to note how invested, and this is not a political issue in Canada, this has been since our centennial in 1967, that there would be Canadian public investment in the arts. And that is something that Canadians in all provinces across the language divide take quite seriously. When we started, we were almost entirely government funded. We are now about 20 to 25%, with the rest being self-generated through sales of our software and our services. But we still maintain that obtaining that government funding is essential, both for the moral right of Canadian investment in the arts, but also to ensure that there is this collective ownership. We really want it known by the industry that we are your association. You own us, you contribute to us, you built us. So government funding, highly recommended. Would love you to consider. It doesn't have to fall along certain party lines. It can be quite successful. The next is our slow and steady burn. We built these products and services not all at once. You could see through that very abbreviated slide that it was incremental. Things started over time, and we built and we built and we built. And we built on the lessons that we had learned. Through building now 3 iterations of sales data, we've learned how to build databases. We've learned how to build queries. We've learned how to house that information, how to host it, and how to deliver it fast and easy. Finally is our work at community building. And this is something that I think is incredible that BISG does. The amount of involvement that this group has in terms of the committees, the volunteer leadership that is happening through the BISG is something that was so important to the founding of BookNet and to getting all of these projects off the ground. So that is something that is admirably done amongst this group, and I think is absolutely phenomenal. Second last is our neutrality. We empathize and we understand that people really want someone to take a position. People want to use our data, to prove that there needs to be more funding, or for other means to exclude or include certain participants in the market, that kind of thing. But our rallying point has always been to be neutral, to be that technological Switzerland and work on behalf of everyone. So we absolutely abhor anecdata. We are constantly honest about the information that we feed out. We don't want to cause harm, so we won't necessarily put out information that harms the industry, but we do believe in propping up the industry with the information that we have. And then finally, that deep product and service integration, using the standards to support the software development, using our software to then but to fuel the research and education work that we do. I think that's why we've accomplished what we have vastly over time. Passing it to my friend. There you go. Thank you.
So Fraser, you even have a few more years than BookNet Canada in the example that you're going to give. So just give us a minute. We'll bring up the slides. And you can start. But maybe you could just start by talking about that history.
Okay. So thank you very much, Brian. It's great actually to be here from the UK and talk about what we do over there. You have, we're talking about basically the returns. We're going to stop, oops, you can tell I'm not used to this at all.
Okay.
What I wanted to talk about was the origins of the system of what I do, and I think we could lose that actually.
Okay, but I think it'll come up in a minute. They'll work on it in a second.
What I wanted to talk about was the origins of Batch. So we're owned by the Booksellers Association of the United Kingdom and Ireland, and what came out of that is a spirit of collaboration. And I think this is where we're going with the BISG and where you all are, that we are working closely with BIC. We work closely with the Publishers Association. We work closely with the major publishers and the major retailers who are members of the association. And we started out as a clearinghouse for all the paper that is in this industry that has nothing to do with books, and which actually still exists even today. And that's not something that's unique to the US, it's something that's around there in the book world. And back in 20 odd years ago, the BIC got together with those interested parties, and they paid KPMG to do a study on what was wrong with the industry. And they looked at it, and they came back and they said that there are the book industry had the worst of any industry for logistics, about returns, about the stock that was being held that was of no use, and also that the processes were very poor. This is, as things have moved on, so you don't have to look and, I'm not saying this is how it is now, this was what they were saying then. And they put a figure on it of £100 million, which 23 years ago, 24 years ago, was phenomenal. And if you extrapolate that out to today's terms, that is something that is significant. And what happened from this was the spirit of collaboration got the big publishers, the big retailers to talk to one another and not necessarily say they were entirely happy with the solution, but they decided on standards of how they could deal with those processes. And fortunately, within the Booksellers Association, I run the technical arm of the Booksellers Association, and we built a method of communicating. And those diagrams of the multi connections that are happening between all the different parts of the businesses, they come through one focal point. And we act, and you talked about Switzerland, we have to be a bit of Switzerland because we get a real overview of what everything is actually happening. And we can't divulge it to any of the other parties that are involved. We help people deal with that process. And one of the big things that happened in the UK, and it doesn't happen in the US because I think that you've got an open returns policy, is that in the UK, we had real confrontation, which was that you'd get the sales reps going into a store and saying, the first thing that the store owner would do is, you sit down and you're going to talk and deal with the returns because you owe me lots of money. And that was really confrontational, and it's all gone away. So I think an out of this also was we do what I do, which is we also run the payments process, which provides the same principle of reducing the number of electronic relationships that you've got. You fire information into one spot and it's dispersed to those. And what the net effect of this is, it strips huge amounts of costs out of the system. And it stops people pushing paper around. And we work now in the UK with, on the payment side, with 80 bookstores in 86 countries. And we are acting like that so that you get somebody who says, I need to, you need to deal with this. And instead of going to this system and that system and that system, they come to one system, and that can take them into the other systems if they want it. And it therefore simplifies the actual physical handling of what we have to do. And whilst we're talking about electronics and we're talking about e-books, the physical market is still vast and is still something that is causing lots of problems. So we see ourselves very much as enablers and being, how can I put it, it's the good person sitting in the middle of it, that it doesn't mean I'm not running a commercial organization, but the ethos is we got to do something about the book trade. And I'm lucky enough to be the chair of the physical supply chain group at BIC, and BIC, like BISG, is central to moving these sorts of things forwards. I'm not really going to talk through the slides because they're entirely logical. Is you make a request, your system is checked, you then, it's checked against the sales record by the publisher. It's then agreed or refused, and then it's confirmed. So the distribution center knows exactly what is going to come back. And when it arrives, it's not a surprise. You don't get to hear these horror stories that there's an articulated lorry appears and suddenly you're scrabbling around in a DC for storage. This is not something that happens. And then they put a barcode label on the boxes, they scan it when it hits the DC, the credit is issued, the credit, it references the returns authorization, so that you're not having loads of people in accounts going, what is this? Where did it come from? You've got something that's auditable and trackable all the way through the system. And I think one of the key things is it's not vague. I'm basically an accountant by trade. For me, things are either right or wrong. They're not nearly there. Your cash is either not nearly there. And it's easy to do with modern systems. And we take the pain out of that. And this is not unique. So I think that's all I really wanted.
Can I just try out on one point that you and I have talked about, which is the IRI, the Industry Returns Initiative that BIC runs. It's a set of agreements on what constitutes a valid return. And,
yes.
And within those agreements, the process is largely automated. So that if it checks and that your order is within the period that we've agreed upon, and not beyond it, or and not less than in many cases, so that it has to be on sale, for example, for 90 days. But that process is automated, and it's a real advantage. It's not to impose the regulations across the industry, but rather to automate what's already been agreed upon.
Yeah, absolutely. So that that process. So if somebody is doing a return, they're firing off, and some people do it manually still, and they agree it according to those parameters. And this was really back to my point. Not everybody's entirely happy necessarily, because you always feel there's a wrinkle you don't like. But those rules that were agreed under the BIC sort of committees, through very hard negotiations, have stood the test of time. And every now and then somebody sort of does a review, and those rules actually have made a huge difference to the whole industry.
Yeah. If I could ask our tech team, I just want to take a look at the last slide before the lunch slide. And as we're putting that up, I'd like to open it up to questions, because I think we've been unfair to this side because we don't see you. But who would like to ask a question? We'll start with, who's got the microphone? I have one just here.
She's coming.
You know, I think you're okay. We have
Ted behind you.
coming right behind you, Ted.
Hey there. So, Fraser, we've spoken a lot, and I know what you see as the biggest opportunities to improve the supply chain in the U.S., obviously bringing batch to U.S. retailers. But Lauren, we've talked a lot, but I've never asked you, where do you see the biggest room for improvement because I'm very envious of what you have built in Canada, so.
I think the marketplace is so different. It is kind of like comparing apples to oranges. The retail landscape is so fundamentally different in Canada that I think that diversification has really helped us. We have a national chain, as you know, that is quite successful and exists as a feasible competitor to some of the major players in the US market, particularly online. So diversification of the retail marketplace, I think, is so important. I think a funding strategy would be incredibly helpful. I'm not sure if that would come from a cultural level at the federal level, or if that would come statewide. I'm not sure about that, but I think sustained funding. Sorry?
Funding for retailers?
Well, we've just started experimenting with that in Canada. We're about 2 years into a national funding strategy for retailers that saw millions of dollars go out. So we haven't been able to analyze the benefits of that yet. And that funding is earmarked specifically for the marketing and promotion of Canadian books online. But we have never funded Canadian retailers from federal cultural strategy before. But publishers have been well funded for years. So, yeah.
And I would add, I think that in the US market, we're handicapped to a certain extent because the train has already left the station. There are already a number of providers, most of whom, if not all of them, are members of BISG, who are operating in the space that BookNet does. I think the opportunity is for us to create repositories rather than feeds. If we moved more to what you see up on the slide as repositories of record, things that were queryable, that you could use APIs, people could then maintain their client list, but then change the way that metadata moves around the industry. And you could also, it would start to reduce some of the flavors of Onyx issues that we have at the retail level. I do think a payments clearinghouse is certainly worth exploring, and it's one of the things that has put BISG and batch. I mean, really ABA has led the way in batch being introduced as an option in the US market, but I think it's a supply chain opportunity, and we would love to be able to take advantage of it. Other questions? Way over there, who's on my left side? I'm going to stand up so I can see.
Yeah, it's hard.
Hi, this is a question for the BookNet panelist. Obviously, you're a nonprofit, but you generate revenue from your software. Is there any inclination or appetite within your organization for open sourcing any of your software innovations, or sharing some of your specifics around your workflow out to other organizations? And I guess relatedly, could you just describe in general terms what the internal hub for these various data sources is around a book? Like, where do you store Onyx and sales and these other kinds of data internally before you then feed it back out? Because obviously Onyx can only handle some of that stuff.
Sorry, can you repeat that last sentence?
Well, just the fact that Onyx can only handle some of the data that you actually feed out. So, you're doing a lot with Onyx, but obviously something internally is bundling up that stuff. And how do you bundle it, generally? So are you going to give us some of this technology? and how are you doing this internally? How are you gathering this information?
Sure, that's why Noah sent you.
I know, yeah, like Noah's like, here, take all of the stuff. The first question for open source. So I want to just make it really clear that the BiblioShare data, as it is through the API, is available to anyone. It is free. If anyone can access that data, we have retailers that are building their Shopify sites, that are building non-Shopify sites, people that are populating websites outside of that, outside of a commercial aspect. We have users like 49th Shelf that have built entire ecosystems online from this. There are software providers now that offer, website building services using our data. And again, it's free. Take it. We want we want data to be out there. We also want publishers to see that there is appetite for their data. And rather than you having to, as a publisher, having to set up those unique connections, just go through BiblioShare, go through a centralized source. It's very Canadian. I know it's so hard to understand. I don't understand it because, we don't make money off of it, and it would be lovely to diversify more. But BiblioShare is completely open source and available. We do have a scaled model in terms of pricing for sales data. Retailers do not pay for access to sales data. We consider their payment in the form of their data, so it's a pay-to-play. You provide your data and you get access as a retailer. And publishers are scaled based on their actual tracked sales through the system. So if you are a small publisher that has a lower title count that sells in a year, you will pay less than a large publisher with a very large title count. And that equitable costing was really key, and we've maintained that throughout. And where do we store the data outside of Onyx? Did I get that accurately? Okay. So my friend, I am not a developer, nor a database administrator. I did forensic science in school, so I'm really gonna get brief with this. So we accept Onyx. We also sideload a number of files, and then everything is tracked back based on the ISBN. Everything is linked back to the ISBN. We have very clearly articulated file naming conventions for both providers as well as when we spit out data to make sure that everything is linked back at the ISBN level. There are places where we do ping against, like we do in Panelists, for example, ping against both BiblioShare and sales data, and again, all at the ISBN level. That has been the way that we've found to be the most manageable. I hope that answers the question from a non-DBA, but I'm sorry if it does not. Sorry.
We probably have time for one more question. Come on, this was the best panel. You have one.
Brian, we heard some great examples here outside the US. What role do you see BISG playing in making this happen for the US market so that we can start to share the benefits of this type of data to improve our respective operations?
I think it's comparable to what BIC and BookNet Canada have done, and Fraser, you can probably talk to it specifically, is to broker the agreements, to put people into the conversation that need to be in part of the conversation. It's not a vast list of players, companies that need to be consulted to make this kind of thing happen. There are significant players in the US market in distribution and in retailing. And if we have the conversations with those folks in the room, as well as the major publishers, I think we can get there. So I think being that honest broker, I don't see us directly, I could be wrong, but I don't see us as becoming BookNet Canada, although I wouldn't mind being BookNet when I grow up. But,
I want to be you when I grow up.
but I think that it's hard to see us as the host because there's so many players already with that hand in that business model. But I do see us potentially. Would you agree?
I would, because I mean that was the key with getting, say, 4 or 5 of the major publishers and 2 or 3 of the really big retailers. Yeah. And they came and managed to thrash out those agreements under the moderation of BIC. And from that, it spilled out. So, you get other businesses like supermarket groups who are following the same rules because it's become industry de facto. And that's really an important way of moving forward.
Same for our marketplace too.
Yeah. And I would say that just to close up, the idea with this is not to say that we should be BookNet or we should be what's happening in the UK under Batch and BIC, but rather that there are plenty of examples, these are 2, but there are plenty of examples in other international markets that point the way to a better provision of supply chain data, both going out and coming back. And I think we're committed to a multi-year effort to try and figure out how that works and how it could work better in the US market. So I'm going to invite Jonathan to come up and tell you a little bit about lunch, and ask you to, while he's doing that, to just a round of applause for our panelists.